Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome back to Houselights, in specific this time, the House of Kurosawa, where we are looking at the works of Akira Kurosawa, the legendary Japanese film director who had such an outsized influence on world cinema. And we are going to be exploring this week the epic film, The Seven Samurai, which was released many moons ago, but had many imitators, followers, and references throughout film history. Released in 1954, we'll be exploring with this film the way it approaches individual responsibility within societal expectation, class distinctions, all of these different things, including the role of the samurai and how the world was changing around them. All of these layers are there for us to explore here as we explore the Seven Samurai. I am one of your hosts, John Mills, and I am happy to be joined on this journey to defend this podcast by my two dear friends, Master Swordsman Darren Moser and lovable hunky boy who's going to wander into the village and make all the young ladies fall in love with him, Tristan Riddell. Tristan and Darren, are you ready to talk about Seven Samurai? Because I believe this is another one where the two of you, this is your first encounter with this specific Kurosawa film, yes?
Yeah, all of these are going to be my first encounter.
Well, it's always good to remind the audience and myself because I forget from week to week as well. So basically what I want to ask first, and Darren, I'll kick it to you first. Even though this is your first viewing, obviously you know Seven Samurai by reputation. How many of its imitators or film references or even just cultural remakes have you seen? You know, like Magnificent Seven,
right.
Stuff like that. How much of an impact have you seen from Seven Samurai despite never having seen the film?
It definitely is one of those types of films. And like you mentioned, I think many people's sideways exposure to it is probably from the Magnificent Seven. I think it's the most known other film, either, you know, the classic or the remake. And that was definitely true for me. And, you know, I kind of describe it as if a child was explaining this movie in 20 words or less. That's how you kind of look at a reference of, you know, village in trouble, go get help, you know, comes, you know, the big broad strokes, I think, are how homages really come through for this movie. But to go back to the source where, you know, like I said, that outline, as it were, but you don't know how long it's going to be or how long we're going to be in the village and then in the other village. And then, but I'm not saying that to detract it. I'm just saying you're letting it play out, because you know those broad strokes. And that's how I approached it. It's like, okay, I know that not all seven survive. I know that the villagers need to recruit samurai and the bandits are coming. You know, I know they'll give and not ask for the pesos at the end. No, wait, that's a different movie.
Slightly different currency.
Slightly different currency. And there were 3 of them instead of 7. But yeah, I think that's just really all I knew. And I think I also knew about the samurai with the giant sword that he, you know, was walking around with it. Not giant, but like larger than a normal sword. And obviously that was played by our good friend who's going to be in almost every single Kurosawa movie we talk about. Oh, which one was him? Was that Yoshido? No, that was a villager.
Toshiro Mifune's character?
Yes. That's
yes.
the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Who had, I think, I mean, a really interesting arc as the farmer child who was, you know, whose family was killed by bandits and came back with a sword. Like that's awesome.
It is definitely really, really interesting. Tristan, same question to you. I mean, like, is this one of those movies where you feel like you had seen it before you saw it because of all of the references that you saw? And if so, did the movie take you by surprise in terms of everything that it did explore?
Well, I was taken aback by how much Kurosawa ripped off McTiernan with 13th Warrior.
Oh yeah, no,
I mean,
it's the
blatant.
parallels are just absolutely unbelievable with the two.
I just don't understand how he got away with that.
Yeah.
Oh, but no. To answer your question, yeah, this is again every single week of Kurosawa will be a shameful week for me, because it's this is one of those movies where you know everything about it because it's so omnipresent in cinema and in cinema lovers and film lovers and everything like that. And I jokingly talked about 13th Warrior. I was super surprised about how 13th Warrior is almost beat for beat the same as Seven Samurai. Like, even when they go like in Seven Samurai, when they go to where they're sleeping and then they burn it down. It's like when Antonio Banderas' character and the rest of them go into the caves and kill the mother, and then that precedes the final battle. It's just like there was just a lot of moments
that's
like
13,
that.
Tristan. Obviously, a totally different movie. 7 is not 13. I don't even see where you're going with this.
Yeah. No.
But yeah, and also, I mean, I think there's more than one Star Trek episode that is based off of this plot line. Like, Darren, you talked about it, about how just like villages in trouble, village finds warriors defend village from bandits. I mean, like that, it's so simplistic.
I mean, there's even years later in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, there's a couple of episodes where it's bounty hunters that they come and they get, and those bounty hunters wind up defending the village. And it's like, if you've seen Seven Samurai, you're like, yeah, hey, that's not even what winds up ultimately being the final fight between Kenobi and Maul is an homage to Seven Samurai. Like the whole, like it's just so baked throughout
it's an archetype at this point,
right? And the whole reason, I mean, being an old Star Wars fan like I am, the reason I watched it for the first time back in the 90s was because we were reading all of the stuff about it. And it was like, so you read Joseph Campbell and you watched Hidden Fortress and you watched Seven Samurai because that was just what you did, because there wasn't an internet to tell you what to think about things. And so you watched it for yourself. And it was, this is my one sidebar before I get to the next question, is like, that's why I've always thrown so much praise on George Lucas as the best film school instructor I could have had without going to film school. Because of Star Wars and all of its references, I wound up finding my way to all of these great works of art that enriched my life. And I was like, hey, he was onto something here. But, all of that aside, I think that what's interesting is that this is another film that was not embraced by critics, especially in Japan when it first came out. It took the international audience to warm up to it, and then it took decades for people to come back to it. Another Citizen Kane reference thrown in there for good measure and everything like that. So one of the criticisms, while we're sitting here talking about Kurosawa's influence on Western cinema, was Japanese critics felt it was too Western in its approach. And it even had Western critics say that it reminded them of cowboy films, which is funny because we all think of Seven Samurai as having vastly influenced them because of the Magnificent Seven thing. Now, Darren, as you look at this, did you feel that there was Western DNA in this? Did you feel that this was a blending of cultural influence from a different perspective?
I mean, I really have no context because I don't know what to compare it to from Japanese cinema before 1950. So we're post-war, we're post-occupation, I believe. Like, they had pulled out, and that's why samurai films were made again, because they were repressed during the follow-up after World War II. So in a way, I mean, it felt familiar, the structure. There was, and I should probably think, comparing it to Rashomon, it did feel a little more traditional, but I'm kind of just, throwing samurai swords at the wall and just guessing. But I will say it didn't feel like anything out of place where there was a tradition or a style or something like that that was foreign to me that I didn't understand at all. it painted with the broad strokes that I enjoyed. I could totally see where they're going. There wasn't a cultural thing that surprised me or anything like that.
Tristan, is this something where you think it winds up illustrating a universality to certain cultural aspects regardless of what society you're in? Or do you think that there was some sort of commingling of influence on it?
Well, I think it's kind of like what we talked about last week with Rashomon, where the story is so primal that it doesn't need to be feudal Japan. And I think the same goes for obviously Seven Samurai, because we've talked about so many remakes and influences. I mean, like we talked about Vikings doing this. We talked about cowboys doing this. I'm pretty sure that I couldn't even finish it, but Rebel Moon, I'm sure, had a lot of influences from
Bugs Life.
Yeah.
Bugs Life is
there you
Seven
go.
Samurai with bugs.
Yep.
And Bugs Life, I can tell you, speaking even as a Snyder fan, significantly better than Rebel Moon. So good choice on not finishing that one, Tristan.
I tried. I really did try.
Yeah, and
I'm a Snyder fan.
And let it never be spoken of on this podcast again. Go on.
But yeah, I think this is it is interesting that when you read the behind the scenes and everything like that, where Eastern audiences were like, it's too much like the West, and Kurosawa just kind of scratches his head and goes, well, yeah, I do love John Ford,
Yeah,
and it's just kind of like with people saying like, oh, like George Lucas, like this is a lot like Seven Samurai, and he's like, well, I do love Akira Kurosawa, like it's just everything goes back and forth, and it's even in the Bible where it says nothing new is under the sun.
Well, I mean, I'll give Lucas credit for at least openly admitting he's like, oh yeah, no. Those are the guys that I liked. So you'll see that. Don't worry. But in addition to the critical reviews, there's the box office reception, and again, it's not a big hit. And this one, unlike Rashomon, doesn't get the awards accolades that Rashomon did. Darren, I mean, looking at it through your first time eyes, this is your first viewing. Is there something about it that strikes you as to why it had trouble finding an audience, engaging people back then? Not in terms of like your own personal thing, but is there anything in the film where you look at it and you're like, you know what, I get why people didn't really dig on this?
It's hard because it is a really good movie. I mean, maybe if you don't like intermissions or something, that long, but that was common in the 50s or more common than nowadays. So I don't think it's that. I think, I don't know. I mean, you're also in the 50s, you're black and white. It's not, well, gosh, I don't even know what they would do in the 50s. Would this have been a dubbed film for American release? Because I don't think, well, I feel bad that I don't know if subtitles were a thing in the 50s, but I have no idea if subtitles were a thing in the 50s.
No, I'm pretty sure a film like this wouldn't have been dubbed. I think you would have had to see the rise of like Godzilla movies and stuff like that. But of course, I can't speak from a position of authority. All I can tell you is that I know that the film was recut several times.
To make it longer? No.
Yes, to make it what it was
if only we could get an extended edition.
Right.
Finally,
it's a
just
whole day
someday,
film.
please.
Just bring the family down.
I feel like so much was left on the floor considering that production took 148 working days, which is the absolute polar opposite. This is like the Apocalypse Now production schedule compared to like the Conversation shooting schedule, right? Like we talked about how Rashomon was like, it was the thing. Its post-production was a week, and that was delayed twice by fires. And then this has 148 days. That's not even post.
And it was shut down 4 times because it went over budget. I think it quadrupled its original budget.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I did notice one thing that we mentioned last week with Rashomon, especially at the beginning when the villagers went over to the old mill and we saw the entire journey of every villager down the street, over the bridge, through the field, up to the mill, into the mill. Like I was like, oh, that's right. We show everything of the journey.
We do. We show all of the steps to underline how difficult life was. Tristan, just as a question, I mean, Do you think that the comparisons to the Western genre or even its influence on the Western genre has to do with, as film becomes a more popular medium, people start to look at the not entirely distant past, but a past that people could still vaguely, in a cultural sense, remember? The Western here, there were people still alive who grew up in the frontier days, might have been very young, but they were around then, or their grandfather was, or something like that. Do you think that Kurosawa is leaning into a cultural norm of wanting to look back at the past and see what it can teach us?
This one being, 500 years in the past, I don't think there's going to be any grandfather stories.
That's true.
About that
That's
one.
true.
But I think we always have romanticized visions of the past in certain areas, and so I'm gonna morph that question into what I want to talk about. So with the romanticized versions of, like, you look at the West, there is a romanticized version of it. Like, we look at Western films, and like, you have some things that are like Unforgiven, but you have other things that are, like it was a bunch of cowboys just running around and having a good time, and sleeping under the stars and eating beans at a campfire, when it was very much not that. And then you have romanticized versions of medieval times, like with knights, like living by a code and chivalry and things like that. And then, like, that's very analogous to how people and cultures view samurais. Like, samurais are very, very viewed like knights. And I know that Kurosawa has said that he comes from a direct line of samurai. And so that's actually why he has that scene where Mifune's character is very critical of samurai, saying like, oh yeah, like, farmers are misers, but how do you think they became that way? Because samurais took advantage of them and, killed them, assaulted their women, and stole their crop and everything like that. Like, the reason these people are this way is because samurai took advantage of their power. And he got a lot of flack for that when it came out, because people still had and have that romanticized view of samurai. And Kurosawa himself wanted to kind of apologize for his own lineage of what his own family had done. But then, of course, we're following the good samurai.
See, that's interesting to me, specifically because there was a professor of mine back in college. He actually wrote a fascinating book. His name was Michael Ulmert. The book was called Milton's Teeth and Ovid's Umbrella. And in it, he had a chapter where what he broke down was, in light of what you're talking about, the romanticized thing, he talked about the cultural similarity between how in the West you had the bandits and the outlaws, but then you also had the sheriffs and you had the townsfolk and you had that sort of thing. And he goes, and if you went over to feudal Japan, he goes, like, basically in an indirect way, he was addressing this question where he was like, it was very similar because you had the Ronin, you had the rogue samurai that would go out. Those were the outlaws, the cowboys from Tombstone. But then you had the lawmen too. And those were the good samurai, like Wyatt Earp and stuff like that. And you had the people in the gray area, like Doc Holliday, like that sort of legendary sort of thing. And I think that's just one of those things where I think that, if anything, if you watch Seven Samurai, or you watch Tombstone, or you watch any John Ford film, there is some romanticizing going on. But I think people were always very cognizant of the fact that, especially in the context of this movie, samurai is a class, and you had good people and bad people in the class. You could generalize a class, but each individual was their own person so far as it went. And Darren, do you think that the film did a good job of characterizing these samurai distinctly enough that you could follow their individual arcs clearly, or did it get messy at any point?
No, I give it major, props for not only making it very clear who each samurai was, kind of their own little code. I even loved when they're in the city and just random samurai are walking back and forth and they're checking out each one. And I just was picturing the prop master that day, like, okay, you get 2 swords and this, and then you're going to walk by, and like, because they had to, create all these background samurai that weren't the 7. And I don't know who is going to be who, because I don't know what these 7 look like yet. And so I'm like, is that going to be one? Oh, he's kind of cool. Oh, no, he's a jerk. He doesn't get to be chosen. But no, I mean, we scoff at the runtime, but it is used very well. Like, what we are given are a handful of villagers that we connect with, and each of the 7 samurai has a bit of a story that influences their decisions, some more than others, but it's not all walking from point A to point B. We are given a lot of nice background. So no, I think it used its minutes wisely. And again, I knew, again, from not folklore, but just knowing the story, that not all 7 were going to survive. So I knew some would not make it. And I think I might have even seen that end shot of the mounds with the 4 swords. So I knew it was going to be like 3 or 4. So I'm like, okay, it's more than half. So let's see how this goes. And that was just very engaging, of like, who's going to make it and why. And I had guesses, but I wasn't entirely accurate.
Tristan, in terms of the characterizations, did you think that Kurosawa handled the characterizations of the farmers, of the villagers, as adeptly as he did the samurai? Or is there a clear choice in who he wants to make distinct?
Well, I think with there being 100 villagers, I think that there was 101 villagers. Like, you can only focus on a few, like Rikishi and I almost called him Yahweh. Yohei or Yohai, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are clearly the people who went to go hire the samurai got more attention. But one thing that I was really interested in reading about was that Kurosawa created a family tree for everybody in the village, like all 100 extras, so that everybody would know whether they had speaking lines or not. Like, you're related to this person, you're cousins with this person, like, these are your children. And he did even more than that for each samurai. And like, everybody who had a speaking role had their favorite food picked out, their mannerisms, their way of speech, and everything of that nature. So like, this was, I have no idea if this is true, but I read that this was one of the first times in Japanese cinema that a director went and wrote that much backstory for speaking roles and even extras. So whether we see the village distinction or not, it's there, whether it's apparent to us. But it was definitely there for the villagers themselves to enhance their own characters. And I find that incredibly fascinating.
I agree. That is fascinating, because it's definitely a degree of detail that, I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, well, did they do that sort of detail for this other epic? Or, did everybody at, just all of our discussions about budget overruns, did they go to everybody in Waterworld and give them their family tree ever since the world got covered in water or something like that? I don't think that Kevin Reynolds or Kevin Costner went to that amount of effort. But I think that it is interesting, because it shows a very deliberate and thoughtful filmmaker at the very least, so that even if the film doesn't work for you on some level, you know that every choice was a very distinct and thoughtful one. And I think that very much comes across in the film, without doubt. Now, in terms of putting the film together, we talked of the recuts earlier. When the feature was screened at the Guild Theater on November 19th in New York in 1956, it was under the title, just as a historical side note for everybody, it was known under the title The Magnificent Seven. It did not come to be known as the Seven Samurai until 1960, when The Magnificent Seven was released, which is fun. But it was with an initial runtime of 155 minutes. Then it was edited down to 141 minutes. Darren, I'll just ask the question point blank, because you mentioned the longer shots, the longer everything. Was there a point during this film where you wanted to pull out an editor's razor and say, okay, guys, we're going back to the booth and we're cutting this down?
I would say in some ways, yes. I feel like the amount that I need or I would cut gets shorter as the movie progresses, meaning by the end, we're moving along very quickly and the attacks are happening and the planning is happening and all of that. So very little from the end, but at the very beginning, like we are spending a lot of time, with the villagers, getting to the other village, looking at the samurai. And again, I want to keep those pieces of the characters, but even the whole romantic subplot was a lot of screen time in this. And so I'm actually almost curious to watch one of the edits, because I think you could completely chop down this movie and it would still function beautifully. I don't think there's anything in the inherent length and scope of the detail that you would absolutely need for this to get the point across. And I think that's proven by its many remakes and homages, because the story concept is so strong even without point A to point B walking. We would be fine.
Now, with those recuts, which were shorter, there was a 200-minute cut broadcast on PBS in 1972, and a 1982 re-release that ran at 203 minutes. So basically, straightforward question to you, Tristan. Was there any point during the film where you felt that the film could have gone into more detail or had longer takes of anything?
Oh.
Okay. That's a very definitive no right there. Nothing else around that. You didn't want to see any more of people plucking beards or anything like that?
No, I'll be honest. I'm not giving this movie a 5-star just because of the length. And I know there are people who disagree with me. This is on so many greatest movies of all time lists, and I'm not arguing that. But this movie had zero business being this long. Good Lord. Like, it had no business being this long.
Well,
and it was everything could be compressed. Every single scene could be compressed.
So let me ask you that question then, because this is a movie that had a lukewarm reception when it first comes out. And sort of, there was some positive, negative mix there in the Western audiences. Majority negative, I believe, in Japanese. But then it gets the esteem when it comes back. Steam rolls in. Now it's a classic. Now everybody loves it. Nobody will approach it. Do you think now that it has found itself, unfortunately, it's removed itself from any honest critical conversation because of its status? Do you think that people would be afraid to agree with you?
I think absolutely. I think that's like, for the people listening, if you feel attacked, we're not talking about you. Okay?
Yes, we are. No, we're totally attacking you intentionally.
No, I think that's true about any older movie that's garnered a following or a cult following or award esteems, anything that's on like a top 100 list, whether that's of mainstream or underground films. You it's so hard to have honest criticism with it, because it's like it's like talking about The Godfather. That's something that I'll defend tooth and nail. But can I honestly say that I'm free of any kind of bias because it's such a cultural touchstone? I don't think I can. I mean, I can try to be as objective as possible, but I'm never going to be truly objective. And I think Seven Samurai is one of those movies, because it is so embedded in the zeitgeist that you can't take it out. It's indelible. And so I think a lot of people would agree with me when it comes to length, because even in the 50s, like 3.5 hours, good Lord.
But the thing is, you built in the intermission so you could get a smoke break. You could deal with 3.5 hours a lot better.
But the thing is that, like, I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings. I love Ben-Hur. I love the Ten Commandments. Like, I'm fine with long movies, but this movie itself did not need to be that long, because, like, when you look at something like the biblical epic or something like Lord of the Rings, they have more than 3 locations, and this movie is not I don't think you can qualify it as an epic. Even if it has that sense of grandeur, it's not an epic because of so many things that are of a smaller scale. And this is not a criticism. Like, I'm not saying like, oh man, no, those movies were epic and this one's not. No, I'm saying I'm using the word literally.
Mm-hmm.
And with this one, you have the village. I'm sorry, you have the town, you have the village, and you have the one set that they burned down, and that's it. Like those are their locations. Again, not a knock, but you have so many situations where everything is just moving so slow, and the walking is slow, the talking is slow. Like there's so many times when I was watching and I'm like, wow, we're still in this scene. Oh my god, oh my gosh. Like, okay, so like Kikuchio's drunken scene that went on probably 3 times longer than it should have. Like we need to establish that he's a drunk. We need to establish that he's a fool, that he stole his name. End of scene. But then they started chasing him around, and then the music changed to be like a Laurel and Hardy kind of bit. And it's just I'm not trying to pick on that scene, but I'm just trying to use it as an example. This happened a lot throughout the movie, where it just kept going and going and going. And when you cut it down to its fundamental parts, it could be much simpler. And for some people, that totally worked. Obviously, you know,
Yeah.
like this guy has like 100% on almost every rating list and everything like that. So this is my Joe Schmo opinion.
Oh, I mean, listen, I think it's completely valid to sit there and talk about how
Joe
some
Schmo
movies
with a podcast.
they you know, no, but they wind up getting immune to criticism. You know, I always make reference to the fact that I felt so seen when Elaine on Seinfeld started hating. She hated The English Patient, and everybody else loved it. And there's a scene where like she's like, "Oh, just die already," and the people in the audience are like, "Oh, shut up." He's like, "No, you shut up," because that was me with The English Patient. So I totally vibe with what you're saying right here. Whether I agree with it for Seven Samurai, you know, I'll save that for later. But you know, Darren, you know, when you do approach a film like this that you've never seen, there is that weight of the fact that it's regarded as a classic, one of the greatest films of all time. You know, did you feel that weight going into it? Did it make you put any distance between you and the film as you were experiencing it because you were waiting for something special to happen? Or was it something where you just were able to compartmentalize and move it aside?
I wouldn't say I was waiting for anything to happen, but I did go in with an expectation. Like I expected it to be a good film, like movies that stay on everybody's top 100, you know, influence a whole generation of directors. Like I'm expecting something. Doesn't mean I'm going to love it or it's going to be my cup of tea or anything like that. But I did have some expectation. But I do agree with Tristan. I don't think the greatness of this movie comes from its epic length. You know, it could, and like I was saying before, the fact that many of the remakes and homages and stuff have done it in shorter time shows you can do it. Even the cuts of this that are shorter. But I will say, you know, that if you're going to cut things out of this, there's definitely a core to keep. You know, I don't know for you, John, when you watched it the first time or even on rewatches, if there ever felt like a core of story that was like a must, like, you know, okay, kill your darlings, but don't touch this.
You know, I can honestly say that with this film, this is where I differ with you guys about the length and the nature of it. Is I think that what works is this is one of those things where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You know, that's an old cliche, but this is one of those films where everything cohesively holds together in such a way that I feel like I've lived with these people by the end of it. And that's what works specifically for me. Is what it unlocks is I feel that sense of, you know, it's like you know, it's like sometimes police officers describe their jobs as like 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. And it's one of those things where I think that this film, with its length, with its sometimes plodding pace, fills you with the idea that like this is why it's so easy to fall into a sense of complacency about danger or problems that you have to deal with. I can put it off. It's not today. These villagers are given a very difficult task of having to worry about what's coming as opposed to what's happening. And they have to invest a lot of time to get to what they know is inevitable. And I think that this is neither a good nor bad thing, but we definitely live in a media age, a film age, where we've all gotten used to a more compressed way of telling the story, you know, whether it's Edgar Wright smash cuts or something like that, where we can compress time through montage. Abstract film has become much more influential in the way people treat time spans in film. And I think that this is, in a sense, it does not feel like a documentary. That is not what I'm saying at all. But it does, I think, a great job of expressing how real life is in terms of dealing with a situation like this and dealing with a life like this. And, you know, part of it, I think, is also that it is giving so much characterization time to these samurai so that you know specifically those differences between them. But visually, you know, Kurosawa here is working with, and I apologize for any name mispronunciation I make to anybody in the audience, Asakazu Nakai. He is a Japanese cinematographer, award winner, won in 1950, won Best Cinematography for Stray Dog. He was Academy Award nominated. We showed a fair amount of praise on Rashomon for the way it was shot. Tristan, did you get a similar visual sense from this? Or was there anything about this where you're like, this is the same guy that did Rashomon?
There was one particular moment. Actually, no, let me talk about my favorite shot first.
Please.
Was the old man in the mill when they they came, like the mother and father with the kid come running to Mifune's character and says he's still in there. And then we get a shot of him from the back. Like we see he's sitting down, we see him from the back, the sun's coming in and the mill is rotating, the wheel is rotating, and you see the sunbeams breaking, and it's just gorgeous. It's just a phenomenal shot. And they don't linger on it. They don't stay on it. They don't force you to admire it. It's just there and then it's gone. And there was more than a few shots like that, but that one in particular was the best in the movie and probably one of the best from the decade. And but there was a moment when, I think it's towards the final battle or the second to last battle, where the camera is up high and you see almost the entire village, but it's zoomed in a little bit, which again, Kurosawa using zoom lenses, telephoto lenses, and multiple cameras in order to get the action to have that flow was pioneering in its time. And there was a moment when towards the lower part of the screen of the shot, there are people on foot chasing somebody through the village. Like they have spears and they're chasing them down and everything like that. And the guy bundles through a fence, like breaks it down. And right as it breaks down, some horses on the middle plane go from right to left, and the people on the bottom are going from left to right. And it's perfectly timed out. And the camera movement is it perfectly goes from left to right and then from right to left. And I can't even imagine how many takes it took to execute that shot perfectly. And the movie is filled with that. And also during the training sequences, there were moments, like there was a lot of camera movements where you had a lot of tracking shots. You had a lot of motion and movement, way more motion and movement than you would normally get in a 1950s film. And there was one shot that really blew my mind when, I think it was when they first encountered the muskets, and Mifune was kind of taunting them. And so like the camera follows him down into the gully, and then he goes up into the fence, taunts them, they shoot a musket at him, and he's like, "Oh crap!" and then
Yes.
turns around and runs back. He goes back up the gully and behind the lines, and the camera tracked him the entire time, going up and down to the side. And I have no idea how they did that in the 50s, and also so smoothly. It's just, this was very much a continued tradition, a much more refined version of what we saw in Rashomon.
Darren, do you disagree with Tristan at all, or do you find that this was, visually very satisfying?
No, we remarked a lot with Rashomon about making the characters stand out from such a busy background in the Grove. And in this one, and we've talked about this with many movies, like we're in the village. I know where every building in that village is. I know which side. There's a map. We take you. I know where the forest path that we're going to light with fire is. Like, your setting. You know where the stakes are. They do such a good job with that. But even from the very beginning, I was struck by the silhouette shots of the bandits the first time they come in as they're riding along, and it was just gorgeous because the hills of the village are in darkness, and just the tops of the horses of the riders peak above that line as they're galloping through to terrorize the village the first time. And I was like, oh man, we're in you. That's like a little signature at the beginning saying you're in for a treat. Not that every shot was that cinematic, and I don't think it should have been, but it worked. And then the last battle starts and it's in the rain. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's why your budget quadrupled again, because you shot your last fight in the rain, in the mud, and that's making it even harder to shoot. But it worked, and it was so interesting.
It was very interesting, but do you think that the music was as interesting as the visuals in this film? The composer for the film was Fumio Hayasaka. Was there anything about the themes or the music that struck you, in the film? Was there anything that stood out for you, Darren?
It was a great score. It's nothing extremely memorable as far as themes, but I will say, when a score is like that, I tend to focus more on the balance of music to silence. And did they jam music everywhere? Or was it like, oh my gosh, I haven't heard music and it's the end of the first and there's the intermission? It's like, no, it was a good balance is what I'm saying. Is there were lots of moments of contemplation, of, preparing for the storm and the battle. You felt all those weights. I will say, there was a couple of music cues in the romance thread where they're like in the flowers or things like that, where I was like, it felt a little out of place from the rest of the tone. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's the romance thread, and that's the only part of that thread in the entire movie. But it did almost pull me out a little bit. I was like, okay, you're frolicking in the fields. We get it. But no, overall, I think this movie was good at carrying the weight of the moment, whether with or without music, which I know kind of sounds like a non-answer, but I'm sticking to it.
Stick to it. Tristan, anything additional about the music that you noticed that you didn't notice?
I thought it was interesting that, Darren, you talked about the romance themes and everything like that, but those two characters were the only two characters to ever get their own theme. And I thought that was interesting, because like that kind of detail usually goes unnoticed, but it shows that they really wanted to kind of pump that up. And even though I feel like you could get rid of that storyline if you needed to save time, there were parts that I definitely enjoyed, like when he was yelling at her when they first meet, he's yelling at her like, "This is no time to pick flowers," and he's saying that as he's shaking flowers at her. Those little moments really made me smile, and I laughed pretty hard at those. And I love the trope. I say this, I truly mean this unironically. I love the trope of movie makers getting the absolute most gorgeous woman available, and then putting a wig on her and then the other characters going like, "Are you a boy? Are you? Because you have short hair, even though you
Mulan
have
effect.
the most, you have the most delicate and gorgeous feminine features. But clearly, you are a boy."
Unfortunately, you're just making me think of Zap Brannigan and Lee Lemon, of course, in Futurama. So, kids, if you haven't watched Futurama, that's an episode for you to check out, including the great line from Captain Brannigan. "Oh, Leela, I've never been so happy to be beaten up by a girl. Let's do it again sometime." So, Darren, I'm sorry, you had something.
Oh no,
want to
I
jump
was just saying, in the spirit of that discussion, there was a part when they go to attack the bandits on their turf. I was a little surprised that they weren't like, "Oh, there's innocent people in this building." It's like, "Nope, burn it all down." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then it gets even, more connected with the man's wife. So that caught me a little off guard, but obviously not out of character, just my modern sensibilities.
Yes, modern sensibilities.
Although, granted, when they did run out from the burning building, they did not struck down the women as best they could. So they still set the building on fire. I'm just saying.
Maybe nowadays we don't set the building on fire, but in the 1500s we would have at least burned the building down. But we did have some limits, I guess. So as we sit here and we've talked about editing, music, length, everything like that, and the prestige of the film, I want to leave plenty of room for final thoughts. So, I'm going to kick it to you first, Tristan, with your final thoughts about Seven Samurai and your rating. And please be mindful. History will judge what you say in these next moments, sir.
I think this is a fantastic film, and there's a reason why it's on the top 100 lists and in some top 10 lists. I think the characterization is great. The different samurai have unique and distinct personalities, and the direction is phenomenal and solid. The cinematography is next level. The micro editing is fantastic. Even if I have issues with the macro editing, this is a complete nitpick, but there was when we first get introduced to Shimada's samurai, and he's cutting his hair, like shaving his head and cutting off his top knot and everything like that. There was no nat sound besides wind rustling through the trees, and it was so frustrating to watch. It was so crazy to watch because there was no body movement, there was no shaving noises, there was no footsteps, there was no nothing. It was just wind through the trees, and I thought I was going insane because I couldn't put my finger on it at first. I was like, something's wrong. I'm really uncomfortable right now, and I don't know why. Also, every child who was screaming in this film sounds like an infant, because I feel like they just use the same sound effects over and over again.
That 7-year-old child, I'm like, really?
That's really? When you run out of money in your production, you can only use the same ADR sound but so many times.
They use the same bullet shot from the musket. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But these are nitpicks. I mean, like I said, I can't give this a 5 stars because you could have easily lost an hour and even kept the same structure. So I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. Like this is a great film. This is a great film, and I'm not arguing with anyone who gives it 5.
Well, speaking of arguing with people who give it different ratings, Darren, where are you going to come in, and why is it a 1?
Oh, geez. Oh, I would never. I'm giving it a 7 out of 7. No, the numbers don't go up that high. Oh, no, this was a really fun film. I am going to give it a 5. I think for its cultural significance, for its edge of parody, really, just on how much it's propagated, not just as story type, but the fact that so many elements are lifted. It's so universal. I will say, in the runtime, I agree it is long, but I'm giving it a little bit of a pass just because I know there are other edits, and I'm sure if I watch some of the other edits, that part would be more palatable. So it's not enough to knock a star for me, and that's fine. But this is just a fun film. I love nighttime shots where you can see things. I'm the simple man. It's easy to please me. And when they lit the forest corridor at night, I'm like, oh, thank you, cinematographer, so I can see the horses coming towards us or the people around the corner. But no, you can see why this movie is so beloved, and why it's taught in film school to look at pacing, to look at handling a cast of 7 leads. I mean, obviously there's leads in The Villagers, but 7 samurai, and I could look at a list and I'm like, oh, that's the guy with the scar and I could list off a dozen things about him. Like that's impressive, because there's ensemble movies where you can't, and you got you could tell who the 3 big actors are, and those are the ones that get the time, and about them, and then the others just don't. So 5 samurai for me. So I'll ask for 20 because I know you'll give me 5. So
we'll move on from Darren's passive aggressive swipe at the Star Trek films. Obviously, when he talks about 3 leads, even though it's an ensemble cast, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we get you there. So I'm going to also give it a 5. This movie impacted me greatly many years ago. I'm probably at the point where I can't be completely honest. We all have those films where even if you could talk me down from the 5, I'd never move from the 5. And it's because this is one of those films where it is so philosophically rich that, like I said earlier, sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There might be other movies that are a little bit indulgent in terms of length, and I'll harp on them for it. But it's, the other comparison I would draw would be like Apocalypse Now, where, for instance, the Redux cut, that's indulgent. It's too long, but I still love it anyway, because what it's exploring, I'm like, I don't mind soaking a little bit in this Calgon bathwater here. That's fine. And when I have a film that decades ago gave me a line that I turn to when it gets really stressful at work or at home, which is, the old man character saying, what's the use of worrying about your beard when your head's about to be taken? And that has become like an absolute mantra by which I live my life when it gets really down to it.
I took note of that too. That's probably my favorite line in the entire movie.
Just absolute, like the film deserves a 5 simply for that line, basically, in my book, because it really hits. It's such a simple line. It's like the Wild Bunch. Each of us dreams of being a child again, even the worst of us, perhaps the worst most of all. I'm like, once I hear that line, I'm like, okay, that's a perfect film as far as I'm concerned, because I'm never can't get rid of that dream state that you put me in. So it is a 5 from me. And I know I warned everybody as we were going through the House of Kurosawa, it's going to be hard to talk me off this 5 ledge, but maybe next week it's possible. Darren, what is it that we're going to be talking about next week here?
Well, next week we're covering The Hidden Fortress from 1958. A little known movie in 77. Might have referenced that once or twice. Next on Houselights.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.